And a good football Thursday, Birds fans. Appreciate you streaming in here on OTA week with John McMullen and Jody McDonald on Birds 365. The two of us are safely ensconced in our home broadcasting studios. Johnny Mac has to venture out into that cold, cruel world with less than quality air quality these days. Johnny Mac, what time are you supposed to head over to Eagles Central?
Uh Practice is supposed to be at 12:50. We'll see how that goes. I can't imagine they're going to practice outside. You've seen the Phillies canceled their game. Though the air today, I'm looking at it, air quality index at 280, which is worse than yesterday at about this time.
Really? It's
Um,
actually worse?
yeah, 294 it was. It is in my location, so we're even worse. Um, yeah, I can't imagine they're going to practice outside. Now they might go in the bubble. We'll see how they handle it, but they might scrap it entirely. Who knows? I mean, I don't think it's that important. But I do know the Eagles had a sort of community thing they do every year, building a playground for the community. The players go out, the coaches go out, and they did it yesterday, but they scaled it back. Um, they don't want the kids out in that kind of air either. So yeah, I mean they're canceling real games. I can't imagine they're gonna. Hey, let's practice at NovaCare complex outside. That's just not how the Eagles do business. So I'm waiting for that text to come through, and we'll see how they handle it. But this is the last day of that's the problem.
Right.
The problem when you don't do anything, Jody, is you have this act of God, and then all of a sudden you got to get all this stuff in before everybody scatters across the country.
Good
Yeah,
luck with that today. And
yeah.
I will add this, and I think you're right, John. I think they will err on the side of caution. At most, it'll be a bubble practice today. And oh, by the way, you've been in the bubble. That's tight with 53 guys during the regular season when the roster is cut down. They still have 89 guys as of right now, so I don't know what they would really accomplish. Something is better than nothing, but I will tell you it would be minimal at best if they attempted to do it inside. As far as outside goes, if you're comping them to the Phillies, Major League Baseball made that decision yesterday. The Phillies were told that you're not going to play the game today. Now, they may have made the same exact call themselves, but as it was announced, it was Major League Baseball that said, no, we're calling this game. We're calling it off so that you don't have to make that call for your fans. We'll go ahead and do it for you. This is up to the Eagles. Roger Goodell, I don't think, is going to come out and say, we're canceling all practices, OTAs for teams in the Northeast. So I think it'll be the Eagles' call. I think they'll make the call that you're referring to, which is at best inside. They're not going to venture outside and try and put their players' health at risk. But if they wanted to, if the I don't know what meter were you using to come up with air
Just
quality?
my weather app on my phone. So
Okay. I don't even know if I
2 3 4.
have that on my phone. I don't know that I've ever downloaded that app. I couldn't tell you what the air quality is at Shea McDonald. But if they chose to do it, if it drops down enough, if they've got a number to, hey, if it gets below this, we're gonna go out and we're gonna get a little practice in. So be it. That will be up to the Eagles because there is no one else guiding them other than themselves on today's decision.
Yeah, and I would imagine if the air quality was 10, as the higher it goes, the worse it is. They're not uh, too keen about doing that much. So I can't imagine they're going to practice outside, as I said. But we'll see how it shakes out. I mean, look, my father smoked Pall Malls unfiltered my entire life in the house, so I've been through worse than this for years. There is that matter of tolerance and all that kind of stuff, but it's bad out, and there's no need to push it, and it's just not that important. I hate to break it to everybody. I feel like I should pretend and say, "Oh, you got to do this and you got to do that." nothing they do today is going to matter to the 2023 season. It's just not. I hate to break it to people, but
You're going to have to break it to me because I disagree with you. Does it matter a lot? Do I think the Eagles lost the Super Bowl in the last 10 seconds because they didn't do as much work in June as the Kansas City Chiefs did? No, of course I don't. But if you didn't think it had any effect whatsoever, zero effect, well, then why would you even bother doing it? Why would you bring the guys in June? You just
inertia. I think we're getting
show up
closer
in
to the point.
July.
I think we're getting closer to the point they are going to show up in July, to tell you the truth. And if you had teams in order, Philadelphia might be first in that group of advocating for that. The Eagles would argue that their health and by the way, they're cognizant. Howie Roseman has mentioned a couple times already, cognizant of they don't want to use that term, but the luck aspect of the health part of it. But they do think, again, it's a cost benefit. Now, I'm not saying it, I think, if you went to the old school approach where teams got to prepare and they had more opportunities to prepare under the CBA, it's a different conversation. But we're not in that era. We're where you are, 10 OTA practices, no contact whatsoever, 3 potential mandatory mini camp practices, no contact whatsoever. They're not playing football. So I think where you're going, and correct me if I'm wrong, yeah, I mean, I would have a different sentiment if they were allowed to practice, but they're not allowed to practice football. So I don't think it has any effect. And basically, when you talk about the Eagles, it's a cost benefit. It's a cost benefit for everybody, and their cost benefit, and they've come to the conclusion is, well, I forget, somebody tore their ACL couple days ago, I think on the Falcons, but I'll double check in the break. You have these non-contact injuries, and that might happen in July, and that might happen in August, and that might happen in September. But if they're not on the field, they're not going to get hurt. And it's just a mentality. It doesn't make any difference, but it feels a little bit better if you lose somebody in something that matters versus something that doesn't, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So if you lose somebody in June doing nothing, it just feels worse than it does if you're really practicing, if you're really preparing, or if you're playing. It just, at least he lost for, you're trying to accomplish something. In June, you have an empty feeling. Yeah, that's my opinion.
You and I do see this pretty much completely the opposite. When the entire National Football League, not just the Philadelphia Eagles, decide, yeah, we're doing away with everything until training camp. Nobody is expected to show up till training camp because John McMullen says we're actually doing nothing. No, I don't think that's going to happen. The Eagles may think it would be an okay idea, but I don't think the National Football League will. So I don't think it's going to go away. And yeah, the way that I look at it is in June, because you're doing less, you're putting yourself less at risk. The guys aren't actually contacting each other, whereas you got 90 guys, somebody's trying to make a team. We might say, I really need to lay the wood here to show that I am an aggressive player and I'm not afraid of you've got a better chance for injury. Back in the old days when they, before they ever showed up for camp, they actually hit. Well, if you're not going to have hitting, well, then, the more the more you get in, the better. The Eagles, as you just pointed out, 10 practices, upwards of 10 practices under the CBA. They're using 6. I would try and wreak out every little thing that I could from this non-hitting time, where every time you step on the field, there's risk, but there's less risk here than there is come training camp, certainly when the games start. I would try and make the most of it. not continue to scale back the way the Eagles do. Now, they did it last year and they went to the Super Bowl. So they've got a leg to stand on that, hey, less is more. We proved that less is more. We'll see if luck plays into it this year, and luck isn't as on their side as last was. But yeah, I do believe that getting whatever.
Well, let me, because I get in trouble because I don't explain things. I'm not by any stretch of the imagination am I saying the Eagles and everybody else in the NFL is going to go stop after the Super Bowl and show up in July. The meetings and the indoctrination and the learning and the teaching is a real thing, and that is important. I'm talking about the on-field stuff, and I'm talking about practice, and I'm talking about, I'm not talking about conditioning and things like that. You want people in the building for structure, if for anything else. There's all these intangible things. You want young players in the building to try to start to learn to become professionals. But if you're not practicing, you're not practicing. And they're not practicing. They're not practicing football. Like, there's a bunch of guys, like I say, if you're going to take anything from these OTAs, it's got to be with the 7-on-7 people, the quarterbacks throwing to the wide receivers, the cornerbacks covering, and even that, they're not allowed to press cover. You even take away some goofy stuff from that standpoint. You got to play off cover. You got to play zone. You can't practice. So if you can't practice, you can't practice. And that's all I'm trying to say. None of this is football practice. And when you're talking about offensive linemen, and you're talking about running backs, and you're talking about defensive linemen, and even, somebody asked me, what's Ben Van Sumeren look like on Twitter the other day? And I'm like, he's wearing whatever he's wearing, the jersey. That's all I can tell you. He's a linebacker. He's a special teams player. I won't be able to see what he can do until he gets the pads on in the summer. I mean, there are certain, like, Britton Covey looked more, I say all the time, look quicker. You can see the athleticism of the wide receivers, the cornerbacks. You can see all that kind of stuff. They're not practicing football, Jody. I don't know what it is. If we go to 7-on-7, maybe it'll have some, if we go to flag football 7-on-7, maybe it'll have some impact. They're not practicing professional football because, and this is not only the Eagles, this is everybody that takes advantage of the 10 practices and the 3 minicamp days. They're not practicing football because they're not allowed to practice football. Now, some people push the envelope and they do some things. And we see John Harbaugh specifically, and some other teams get Seattle, Pete Carroll, New England, Bill Belichick, kind of old school guys, right? Pushing the envelope too far and they get hammered.
Slapped on the wrist, yeah.
Yeah. They get fined. They get OTA practices taken away. And from their standpoint, it's like, all right, take one away. If you take one away where we do nothing, I guess that's better if we break the rules and do something. That's sort of their mentality. But my only point is, if you can't practice football, you can't practice football.
Let me ask you a question. And Martin Frank is going to join us coming up in just a couple of minutes. If what the Eagles have done the last couple of days, today aside, because we don't know if it's even going to happen because of air quality here in town, but what they've done when gathered the last 3 days last week and 2 days this week, if it's not practice, what would you call it?
I don't know, activity.
Okay.
That's what it's called, right?
Then I will use your word. I think the Eagles are doing less activity than they could or should. If they're not practicing, and I understood your whole speech, and it made sense. If here's what we know as practice, here's what we define as practice once camp starts, and they're not doing that now, so you can't call it practice. Okay, you're right. Well, then what are they doing now? They're not even doing activities. They're doing
they are doing activities though. And by the way, it's called off-season.
Full activities as compared to other teams in the National Football League. They're not taking full advantage of activity period.
I maintain they are, but they're not doing it in front of the cameras, which they like. to be honest. They like to keep people like, and I see Martin Frank in the green room, people like Martin Frank away as much as possible because they have this, which is goofy. I'll be the first in line to say this CIA-like mentality of, you hear Nick Sirianni talk about it. We have an advantage. He said when he got here as a rookie coach, nobody knows what we're going to do. We have an advantage. He said it with Sean Desai. We're going to be a little bit different. Nobody knows what he's going to be versus what we were. That's a little bit of advantage. He takes this stuff way too seriously. I'll be the first in line to say that. But they've been training. They've been training for 6 weeks and doing the conditioning and that aspect of it. They just don't open it up like other teams, which is sucks for people like for people like me and Martin, but it sucks for fans because they don't get the information because we're not there.
Did I miss the fine that Nick Sirianni got for doing too much closed door, which you can't see, but the players, if they wanted to, could report to the players union, as has happened in Seattle and New England? Did the Eagles get a fine on that one? Did they CIA keep that under wraps from you, John McMullen?
Nobody's gotten a fine for doing what they're not supposed to do this year. New England got fined for screwing up the schedule. As far as contact, Harbaugh's been fined in the past for that. Carroll's been fined in the past for that. The Patriots, I believe, have been fined in the past for that. That has not happened to this year. Now, maybe it does happen. Maybe people are pushing the envelope in other situations. But, then you default back. Well, there's only 2 Super Bowl teams, and they're one of the ones that made it. So they're not getting some huge advantage by breaking the rules for one day. And, oh, by the way, getting OTAs taken away because of it. So that happened in years past. Under the current rules, they do what you're allowed to do, and they maximize the way they do it.
Let's at least go here. How many practices were they allowed to have? How many activity sessions were they allowed to have?
13.
How many are they having?
6.
I rest my case. The conversation's over and done with. They're doing less. You can't even begin to say they're doing it under the cover of darkness and not allowing the media.
No, that's not what I said.
They're using half of the allotted amount of times that they could have these activities.
They have 6 weeks of OTAs. 6 weeks. And for conditioning and training and weight room and getting guys ready. That's what I'm talking about. That's what they're doing. That's what they're taking advantage of. The 13 practices that they're allowed to have that were cut down to 6.
Call them activity sessions, because
I'm
not
claiming
really practices.
What I'm saying is they're not important because you're not practicing. You're just going out there and you're showing off.
Well,
and
why did they do the 6? Do none.
Well, I think eventually they're going to get to that point, to be honest.
Well, they can get there now if they so choose. There's no league rule that says
there
you
are
must
league
get together
rules
for activity.
There are league rules as far as media access, which unfortunately, from their standpoint, they have to adhere to. There are league rules you have to adhere to. You have to open up one day for each session of OTAs or each section of mandatory work. If you have to, by the way, mandatory work, you have to open up every single practice, which is one of the reasons, but you don't have to have
with it. Right. Yeah.
Yes. Which is the biggest reason, by the way, why they did away with it. But I know we got to get to break and we got to get to Martin. He's waiting. But that's what I'm talking about. They're not practicing. So if they're not practicing, who cares? That's all I'm saying.
Okay. And I'm raising my hand and say, I care. All right. Martin Frank cares too. He's got a good attitude and we're bringing him up next. Martin Frank joins us here on Birds 365.